In this town, football is a religion, and Coach Marcus Thorne was our god. He was a formidable man of iron and stone, a legend who never lost a game or a fight. But Marcus had a secret, one that started 15 years ago and walked back into town wearing the colors of our bitterest rivals. His name was Julian Vance, the new coach for the Oak Haven Wolves. To the fans in the stands, they were enemies. To the boys on the field, they were tactical titans. But behind closed doors, they were two men burning with a desperate desire that threatened to turn the entire season into a pile of ash. Tonight, I'm taking you inside the locker rooms and the midnight ranch houses of Ironwood to show you the high price of a forbidden love. How much would you sacrifice for a truth that could cost you your legacy? Would you choose the glory of the win or the man you were never supposed to touch? Stick around because the final whistle of this story is a blow that no one in Texas saw coming. In the small town of Ironwood, Texas, Friday night isn't just a time of week, it's a religion. And if the town is the church, then Coach Marcus Thorne was its high priest. At 48, Marcus was a formidable man, built like a slab of granite that had survived a century of storms. He had led the Ironwood Titans to 5 state championships, and his word was law, from the local diner to the school board. He was a man of few words, a rugged veteran with salt and pepper hair cropped close and amber eyes that could pin a linebacker to the turf with a single glance. Marcus lived a solitary life in a ranch house that overlooked the valley, a life defined by film study, whistles, and the smell of fresh-cut grass. He was the image of Texas stoicism until the day the school board announced they had hired a new offensive coordinator for their crosstown rivals, the Oak Haven Wolves. His name was Julian Vance. Julian was 32, a former star quarterback who had left Ironwood 15 years ago under a cloud of rumors. He was the golden boy who had walked away from a full ride at UT, and now he was back, looking leaner and sharper than ever. Where Marcus was the immovable object, Julian was the unstoppable force, innovative, fast, and dangerously charismatic. The first time they met on the field for the preseason weigh-ins, the air in Ironwood seemed to turn to static. Marcus was standing by the 50-yard line, his canvas work vest over a dark polo, his arms crossed over a chest that still looked like it could hold a defensive line. Julian walked toward him, his gait smooth and confident. He wasn't the boy Marcus remembered. He was a man now, with sun-streaked hair and a defiant arc in his eyes. "Coach Thorne," Julian said, his voice smooth but edged with a history only the two of them understood. He didn't offer a hand. He just stood there, letting the heat of the afternoon sun bake the tension between them. "Vance," Marcus grunted, his voice a low rumble. "I heard you were back. I didn't think you had the stomach for Ironwood after how you left." Julian stepped closer, his presence challenging the space Marcus occupied. "I didn't come back for the town, Marcus. I came back for the game. And maybe to show you that the world didn't stop turning just because you stayed put." The desperate desire to say more, to shout, to demand answers for 15 years of silence was visible in the tightening of Marcus's jaw. But in Ironwood, you didn't talk about feelings, you talked about the scoreboard. The rivalry between the Titans and the Wolves reached a fever pitch within a month. But while the town was focused on the upcoming Battle of the Valley, Marcus was losing his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he didn't see defensive schemes. He saw the way Julian's shirt caught the light on the sidelines. He saw the thick mat of dark hair visible at Julian's collar when he unbuttoned his polo in the heat of the fourth quarter. One rainy Tuesday night, Marcus was deep in the film room at the high school, the blue light of the projector flickering against the walls. He was obsessively watching Julian's offensive plays, trying to find a weakness, when the door creaked open. Julian stood there, dripping wet from the Texas downpour, holding a hard drive. "Your janitor let me in.
I left my play scripts in the shared coach's office. Marcus didn't stand up. He stayed in the shadows, his formidable frame silhouetted against the glowing screen. "You're working late, Vance, or are you just here to see if I've figured out your slant route?" Julian walked into the room, the scent of rain and ozone following him. He leaned against the table, looking at the screen where his own players were frozen in time. "You were always a perfectionist, Marcus. That's why you never let anyone in. You were too afraid they'd see the cracks in the granite."
"I don't have cracks," Marcus growled, finally standing up. He towered over Julian, the sheer physical scale of him filling the small room. "Don't lie to me," Julian whispered, stepping into Marcus's space. The blue light of the projector played across Julian's face, highlighting the raw intensity there. "I spent 4 years as your quarterback and another 10 trying to forget the way you looked at me in this very room the night before I left town. You think I don't know what's behind that whistle and that scowl?" The tension broke like a fever. Marcus reached out, his large, calloused hand gripping the back of Julian's neck, pulling him forward. It wasn't a gentle move. It was the move of a man who had been starving for 15 years. "You should have stayed away, Julian," Marcus breathed, his forehead resting against Julian's. "I couldn't," Julian replied, his hand landing on Marcus's broad chest, feeling the frantic, heavy thud of a heart that was supposed to be made of stone. "I wanted to see if the King of Ironwood was still human." Outside, the Texas rain turned into a deluge, masking the sound of the projector clicking as the film ran out, leaving them in a darkness that felt like a confession. The 3 weeks leading up to the Battle of the Valley were a blur of adrenaline and agonizing silence. To the town of Ironwood, Marcus Thorne and Julian Vance were bitter enemies, 2 tactical geniuses preparing for a war that would define the season. But behind the closed doors of Marcus's ranch house, the only war was between duty and desire. The affair was a wildfire. Marcus, a man who had spent his life disciplined and guarded, found himself undone by Julian. It was in the way Julian looked at him across the kitchen table, defiant and knowing. It was in the way Julian's hands, smaller but just as strong, traced the scars on Marcus's shoulders from his own playing days. "If they see us, Julian, it's not just the job," Marcus whispered one midnight, his voice a low vibration in the quiet house. "It's everything. This town, they don't forgive men like us." Julian leaned back against the headboard, the moonlight catching the lean muscles of his chest. "You've spent your whole life worried about what this town thinks, Marcus. But who's going to hold you when the lights go out at the stadium? The school board? The boosters?" Marcus didn't have an answer. He just pulled Julian closer, the thick mat of dark hair on his own chest pressing against Julian, trying to drown out the fear with the physical reality of the man in his arms. But the pressure was leaking into the field. During practice, Marcus was uncharacteristically distracted. He snapped at his players for minor errors, his formidable presence turning from inspiring to suffocating. His lead linebacker, a sharp kid named Cody, began to notice the way Coach Thorne's truck stayed in the school parking lot late at night, right next to the silver sedan belonging to the rival coach. The Friday of the big game arrived with a heavy, humid tension. The stadium was a sea of Ironwood silver and Oakhaven blue. The air smelled of popcorn, diesel, and desperation. As Marcus walked onto the turf for the coin toss, he locked eyes with Julian. Julian looked professional, his headset on, his eyes focused. But for a split second, as their paths crossed at midfield, Julian's hand brushed Marcus's arm. It was a ghost of a touch, a reminder of the night before. But in the high-voltage atmosphere of the game, it felt like a lightning strike. The game was a defensive masterpiece. Marcus's Titans were a wall of iron, but Julian's Wolves were playing a brand of innovative football that kept the Titans on their heels. By the fourth quarter, the score was tied 14-14. The crowd was screaming, a wall of sound that vibrated in Marcus's bones. Marcus stood on the sidelines, his jaw set,
his amber eyes scanning the field. He saw Julian across the way, pacing like a caged tiger. Julian called a timeout and looked directly at Marcus. In that moment, a signal passed between them, not a football signal, but a moment of shared vulnerability. Marcus saw the exhaustion in Julian's face, and for the first time in his career, the king of Ironwood didn't want to win. He wanted to protect the man on the other sideline. On the final play of the game, with 5 seconds on the clock, Julian's quarterback threw a Hail Mary toward the end zone. Marcus's star safety had a clear shot at an interception, but Marcus, caught in a momentary lapse of focus, failed to bark out the defensive adjustment he had rehearsed 1,000 times. The ball soared. The catch was made. Oakhaven won. The stadium went silent for a heartbeat before the Oakhaven side erupted into chaos. Marcus stood frozen. He had just lost the most important game of the year, not because he was outplayed, but because he was compromised. As the teams shook hands, Cody, the linebacker, walked past Marcus. He didn't look at his coach. "I saw you, coach," he muttered, his voice dripping with hurt and realization. "I saw you at the ranch house last night. You didn't lose this game on the field. You lost it before we even showed up." Marcus watched Cody walk away, the weight of the betrayal settling into his gut like lead. He looked up and saw Julian being hoisted onto his player's shoulders, a hero in the blue light of the stadium. Julian looked happy, but when his eyes met Marcus's, the joy vanished. He saw the ruin in Marcus's expression. The secret wasn't a secret anymore. The foundation of Marcus Thorne's legendary career was cracking, and the town of Ironwood was about to find out exactly what their high priest had been doing in the dark.
The Monday morning after the loss felt like a funeral. In Ironwood, a loss to Oakhaven was bad, but a loss caused by a distracted coach was a scandal. By noon, the rumors Cody had whispered were no longer whispers. They were a wildfire burning through every coffee shop and locker room in the county. Marcus Thorne sat in his office, the walls covered in photos of championship teams and silver trophies. For the first time, the room felt like a cage. The school board had called an emergency meeting for that evening. He knew why. In a town that prided itself on traditional values and the rugged stoicism of its leaders, Marcus's relationship with Julian Vance was seen as the ultimate betrayal, not just of the team, but of the town's identity. The door opened, and Julian walked in. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed. He wasn't wearing his Wolves gear. He was in a simple black t-shirt and jeans, looking more like the man Marcus loved and less like the rival coach. "They're coming for you, Marcus," Julian said softly, closing the door behind him. "The Oakhaven board is breathing down my neck too, but Ironwood, they want your head on a platter. They're calling it conduct unbecoming."
Marcus looked up, his amber eyes hard but weary. "I've given 20 years to this dirt, Julian. I've raised their sons. I've won their trophies. And now they want to strip it all away because of who I am when the stadium lights go out?" "They want to strip it away because they're afraid," Julian replied, walking around the desk and placing a hand on Marcus's broad, tense shoulder. "They're afraid that their hero is human. They're afraid that the formidable Coach Thorne has a heart that doesn't belong to the Titans." Marcus stood up, his massive frame towering over Julian. He felt a desperate desire to just walk out, to leave the trophies and the whistles behind, and drive until the Texas border was a memory. But he was Marcus Thorne. He didn't run. "I have to go to that meeting," Marcus said, his voice a low, gravelly vow. "I won't let them whisper. If they're going to tear me down, they're going to do it while looking me in the eye." The high school auditorium was packed. The air was thick with the scent of floor wax and hostility. The 5 members of the school board sat on the stage, looking like a jury. Marcus stood at the podium, his canvas vest buttoned up, his posture as straight as a goalpost.
Coach Thorne, the board president began, a man whose own son Marcus had coached a decade ago, there are allegations regarding your conduct with a member of the opposing coaching staff. Allegations that suggest your focus and your loyalty may have shifted. What do you have to say for yourself? Marcus looked out at the crowd. He saw the parents, the boosters, and his players sitting in the back rows. He saw Cody, the linebacker, looking at the floor. And then he saw Julian standing at the very back of the hall, a lone figure in the shadows. I've spent 20 years teaching your boys how to be men, Marcus's voice rang out, deep and resonant, vibrating through the room. I taught them that strength isn't just about how hard you hit, it's about the truth you carry when no one is watching. You're asking if my loyalty shifted? No, my loyalty to my players never wavered. But for the first time in my life, I found something just as important as the game. He paused, the silence in the room so heavy it felt like it might collapse.
I love Julian Vance, Marcus said, the words cutting through the air like a whistle. And if being the formidable leader you want means I have to lie about that, then I'm not the man for this job. I resign, effective immediately. A gasp moved through the room, followed by a stunned, ringing silence. Marcus didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked off the stage, his boots heavy and rhythmic on the wooden floor. He walked straight through the center aisle, past the staring eyes and the hushed murmurs. When he reached the back of the hall, Julian was waiting. Without a word, Julian reached out and took Marcus's hand, their fingers interlocking, a public display of the secret they had died 1,000 deaths to keep. They walked out into the cool Texas night, leaving the trophies and the King of Ironwood title behind. As they reached the parking lot, Marcus looked back at the stadium lights one last time. They were dimming, the season ending in a way no one expected. "What now?" Julian asked as they reached Marcus's truck. Marcus looked at Julian, the man he had sacrificed his legacy for, and felt a peace he hadn't known in decades. "Now," Marcus said, a small, rare smile touching his rugged face, "we find a new game, one where we don't have to play on opposite sides." In the end, Marcus Thorne realized that his greatest victory wasn't a state championship. It was the courage to be himself in a town that demanded he be a legend. Some people will see this as a tragedy, a fall from grace, but for Marcus and Julian, it was the first day of their real lives. If you believe that love is the only trophy worth winning, please give this video a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have resigned like Marcus did, or would you have kept the secret to save your career? This has been Gay Stories Chronicles. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to hear more stories of the formidable men who find their way to the truth. I'll see you at the next kickoff.